All right, what's going on, folks? Yo, we're here live once again. Um, this is something that I wanted to talk about ever since I heard something that was said yesterday. And this was said, um, during the pay-per-view of Wilder versus Fury 2. Um, and this is something that has been bothering me for a while. It's been a topic that has been raised. It has been raised multiple times within boxing circles, right? And it stems from something that happened years ago. It's almost been 30 years ago. Um, and it deals with something that happened within the heavyweight division. Now we're talking about the 1990s. It was pretty much a very very active division at that particular time. Of course, the early 90s, you had Mike Tyson, him being upset by Buster Douglas, and then excuse me, and then Buster Douglas eventually being defeated by Evander Holyfield. So then Evander Holyfield became that undisputed heavyweight champion. Okay. Then, a couple of years, after Evander Holyfield, defeated Buster Douglas, and after his winning streak, where he defeated George Foreman, he defeated Burt Cooper, he defeated Larry Holmes. In late 1992, he fought a big guy by the name of Riddick Bowe. And, Riddick Bowe was coming in there undefeated, tall guy, with a piston like jab and whatnot. And he was able to defeat Evander Holyfield. He was able to defeat Evander Holyfield to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of that time. So that was, November of 1992. Okay. And there were some things going on within the heavyweight division at that time. You had Riddick Bowe coming up in ranks. He was able to knock down Evander Holyfield and then eventually win by decision to become the undisputed champion at the time. Then you had another fight that happened for a top contender slot. Okay. And it was between two heavyweights, Lennox Lewis and was Lennox Lewis against Donovan Razor Riddick. That fight happened, before the Bowe Holyfield fight. That fight happened on October 31st, 1992. Was a couple of weeks before the fight between Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe. Okay. So in that fight, Lennox Lewis against Donovan Razor Riddick, Lennox Lewis was able to defeat Razor Riddick by a TKO for the Commonwealth Heavyweight Championship. Okay. Then, like I said, 2 weeks later, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe at the Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas, where Riddick Bowe was able to score, knockdowns in that fight and end up winning by unanimous decision to become the at the time, the undisputed heavyweight championship. Now, there has been a claim by multiple people that side with Lennox Lewis, and there's been a claim by Lennox Lewis himself that Riddick Bowe ducked him. In the pay-per-view, in that opening fight, Lennox Lewis made a comment about the era of the 90s in the heavyweight division, and all the fighters that were out there in the heavyweight division at that time. And he said something to the extent of, you had Evander Holyfield, it was, there to fight me. You had Mike Tyson that was willing to fight me, and he mentioned Riddick Bowe's name. And he said that Riddick Bowe didn't want to fight him. In the instant that I heard that, I was like, you are a liar. You're an absolute liar. And so immediately after that, I said that I was going to show that Lennox Lewis lied when he said that Riddick Bowe didn't want to face him. So that's what I'm going to do here. Okay. So we're going to go into, the whole little thing between this thing here, right? And we're gonna, try to make things as short as we could possibly can, right? But we're going to see how this thing shapes up, okay? Now, a lot of people that side with Lennox Lewis and Lennox Lewis often points to the instance of when Riddick Bowe trashed the belt, the WBC belt. Okay. Now, the problem is they never brought up why Riddick Bowe ended up dumping that WBC belt. And the reason why he dumped that belt was because Lennox Lewis and his team would not let Riddick Bowe's team give him a deal in order to, have the fight basically take place later on down the line. Okay. Now, here's the thing about it. Okay. Now, this I'm going to, basically show one article that's in relation to this thing where Bowe had dumped the belt. So I'm going to see if this thing could come on here. All right. Now, this is, coming through the New York Times. This is on December 15th, 1992. So this was pretty much 4 weeks after Riddick Bowe had won the WBC, WBA, and IBF heavyweight championships of the world. And this is what Riddick Bowe was saying. The WBC is wrong, and I will not be intimidated by them, Bowe said. I'm the heavyweight champion of the world, and today I withdraw my recognition of the WBC. For as long as I am champion, I will not recognize or defend this dishonest belt. And it shows there that Rock Newman said that Lennox Lewis had been offered 2 chances to fight Bowe for the title. He said a guaranteed $3 million first fight with the possible payoff of $15 million more for a first defense if he beat Bowe, or $3 million to fight an opponent of his choosing, plus $9 million in the share of the promotion for a follow-up fight with Bowe. He said that, after initially turning down an offer of $3 million, he said he was willing to take the fight, but by then Bowe had changed his mind. That's what they're claiming. It has been Lewis who has waited on the deplorable actions of the WBC. As long as Riddick is champion, he will never fight for or recognize that belt. Now, that was Rock Newman talking about the whole situation in December of 1992. Now, remember, I said that Lennox Lewis had fought Donovan Razor Riddick in October of 1992 at the end, October 31st, 1992. And then 2 weeks later, you had Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield for the undisputed heavyweight championships of the world. Okay. And what ended up happening was Riddick Bowe ended up winning by decision to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Now, I showed the article talking about when Bowe dumped the WBC belt, and that people keep bringing that up as far as like Bowe ducking Lewis. But that was not the case. Once again, that's not the case. I want to know something. For those that claim that Bowe ducked Lewis, I'm curious about something. If y'all say that Bowe ducked Lewis, then why are y'all forgetting about what Riddick Bowe did after the fight, where he defeated Evander Holyfield for those undisputed heavyweight championships? In case y'all forgot, I'm going to see if I could pull up something to refresh y'all memory. Let's run it.
Bowe slips away, and then the punch to the side of the head. Holyfield in trouble here. Goes down. The only other time in his career he went down was against Burt Cooper in Atlanta.
All right, let's go. Let's go. I want you to know something, Bowe. I'm not afraid of you, Lennox, and we're going to get it on. I owe you one.
Okay.
You're not the man I thought you were. You lied on me. I thought we was cool.
Yo, bring it on, man.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it. I'm going to bring it. You ain't saying nothing but a word. Razor Riddick was afraid of you.
I'm going to knock you out.
You was a chump. You ain't going to knock nothing out, Bowe.
I'm going to knock you out.
You ain't going to knock nothing out.
You know I'm going to knock you out.
knock nothing out. If I like, you know what, do it, man. Do it, man. You ain't do shit. I ain't know from what my feet. You're the champion. You had help from the rest. You had well, knock me out. Knock me out there, Bowe. You ain't nothing to me. Oh, watch your mouth, son. Hey, look, man, take your man away, man. You ain't nothing to me. Take your man away, man.
You know what? I want to run that back. I really want to run that back because I don't think people understand that Riddick Bowe was not scared of Lennox Lewis. If Riddick Bowe was scared of Lennox Lewis, why in the world would he do this? Let's go ahead and run this one more time for the people.
The punch to the side of the head. Holyfield in trouble here. Goes down. The only other time in his career he went down was against Burt Cooper in Atlanta.
All right, let's go. Let's go. I want you to know something, Bowe. I'm not afraid of you, Lennox, and we're going to get it on. I owe you one.
Okay.
You're not the man I thought you were. You lied on me. I thought we was cool.
Yo, bring it on, man.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it. I'm going to bring it. You ain't saying nothing but a word. Razor Riddick was afraid of you. I'm gonna knock you out.
You're a chump. You can knock nothing out, Bowe.
I'm gonna knock you out.
You can knock nothing out.
You know I'm gonna knock
You can
you
knock
out.
nothing out.
If I like you know do it then. Do it then. You ain't do shit. I ain't never come off my feet. You had help from the ref. You had ref. Well, knock me out. Knock me out there, Bowe. You ain't nothing to me. Oh, watch your mouth, son. You ain't nothing to me.
Say you better watch your mouth, sucker. Said it ain't nothing but a word. Said, come on, man. Don't tell me, do not tell me that Riddick Bowe was scared of Lennox Lewis. Why would somebody step to Lennox Lewis face to face like that and say that he was scared of Lennox Lewis? If I step to you like that, or if anybody steps to you like that, then they ain't scared of you. So this claim about Riddick Bowe ducking Lennox Lewis, that's an absolute lie. Because you don't step to nobody like that if you're scared of them. You don't say use a bum. You don't say ain't nothing but a word. You don't say I owe you one. He talked about bringing up the thing with the Olympics. He was never off his feet. He talked about the ref in the Olympic Games, how they stopped it prematurely. So Riddick Bowe was waiting to fight Lennox Lewis. This is the same. We're talking about the same Riddick Bowe, right? That fought Jorge Luis Gonzalez years later. The same Jorge Luis Gonzalez that defeated Riddick Bowe in the amateurs. And what did he do to Jorge Gonzalez in the amateurs? I mean, in the pros. He busted him up and knocked him out. So he's not scared about anybody or scared from anybody that defeated him in the amateurs or got a win from him in the amateurs. Riddick Bowe wanted to prove himself. So don't tell me about Riddick Bowe ducking Lennox Lewis because he dumped the WBC belt. Cause that's y'all can't bring that up because you had that whole thing in '92, and then the WBC tried to pull something on them. And let me see if I could pull this up. And I'm going to show you that it was basically the WBC that tried to mess this whole thing up. Let me see if this is the right thing here. Okay. Now, this is an article from UPI in the archives. This is around August of 1992. This is before both of those fights, the fight with Lennox Lewis and Razor Riddick, and the fight with Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe. Here was something where they had a Senate hearing in reference to the corruption in boxing and whatever it is. Okay. Now, we're going to go from this paragraph here talking about one of Nunn's constituents is heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield, who turned to his center for support when his title was threatened by the World Boxing Council. Holyfield was asked if it was his impression that the WBC and promoter Don King, already a target of investigation and civil suits, are in cahoots. Holyfield says, "I would think so." Who will refuse to be pressured into fighting Mike Tyson when he was the #1 contender before taking on George Foreman. Considering that the rules allow a new champion to capitalize financially by making a voluntary defense before having to take on the top contender. Let me go through that sentence once again. Considering that the rules allow a new champion to capitalize financially by making a voluntary defense before having to take on the top contender. Holyfield was asked why the WBC and King wanted the rules bent so that Tyson would get the immediate crack at Holyfield's crown. Now, the whole thing with that was they were trying to set up that fight after Mike Tyson lost the belts. And before Mike Tyson had basically, went to jail and whatnot, they pretty much set things up. They pretty much set things up for him to, basically be back in the top contendership or whatnot. But Evander Holyfield wasn't having it because they knew in the WBC rules that at the time, if you won the championship or was a new champion, that you get a voluntary defense before you face your mandatory or the top contender. Now, fast forward a couple months, you have that fight, Lennox Lewis, Razor Riddick. That was going to be for that top contender spot. You had Evander Holyfield, Riddick, Bowe. Now, if Evander Holyfield had defeated Riddick Bowe, then he would have faced Lennox Lewis next. But since Riddick Bowe defeated Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe didn't have to fight Lennox Lewis. However, he said, look, I want to fight Lennox Lewis. Make that fight happen. He said that. But he said that going through those rules, he had to make the deal where you have a voluntary defense first, and then you could go ahead and have that mandatory defense. That is why you had the thing with Rock Newman where he put up that deal where he said that Lennox Lewis could get $3 million in a first fight or introductory fight, and then fight Bowe after that in the mandatory defense. Because under the rules, the WBC rules, Riddick Bowe did not have to fight Lennox Lewis immediately after he fought Evander Holyfield. He had basically options pretty much at the time. He could have had that rematch, immediate rematch, Bowe Holyfield, or he could have had the voluntary defense and then Lennox Lewis. But Lewis and his team did not want that. So that is why Riddick Bowe ended up dumping the WBC title, because the WBC didn't want to adhere to their own rules when it came to when a new champion won the belt. So that's one instance. But we could see if we could take it further, because you know what? It isn't like Bowe didn't want to fight Lennox Lewis. Now, after the whole thing with the belt being dumped, you had something else. There was another offer that was sent, and that was sent in May 1993. Lennox Lewis offered $12 million to fight Bowe with the WBA and IBF titles on the line. Says that a possibility of a Riddick Bowe Lennox Lewis heavyweight showdown was rekindled yesterday when Rock Newman offered Lewis $12 million for a championship match at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas on November 5th. Newman made the latest pitch in a letter to Lewis promoter Dan Duva Main Events, who also has promotional ties to Bowe. Copies were sent to Frank Maloney, who manages Lewis. Okay. Newman set a Monday deadline for a response, promising a letter of credit if the reply is positive. Now, we'll go down later, okay? He said that they had sent another offer. He said the offer in February, rejected by Lewis's financial advisors, was for a reported $10 million, but came with the addendum that Lewis must first relinquish his WBC belt. Okay. Bowe had trashed the belt earlier, refusing WBC president Jose Sulaiman's ultimatum to make Lewis his first title defense after winning the undisputed crown from Evander Holyfield last November. This time, we're not even asking that, Rock Newman said. We're going to cut the WBC out entirely. This will only be for the for the IBF and WBA titles. Lewis can keep the WBC belt and do whatever he wants with it. Now, you have the thing with Rock Newman and Dan Duva, but that key part there about we're going to cut the WBC out entirely. This will only be for the IBF and WBA titles. Lewis can keep the WBC belt and do whatever he wants with it. Now, like I was saying, Riddick Bowe and Rock Newman wanted to cut out the WBC title, entirely, right? He wanted to, basically not have the WBC, not have the WBC involved in it because they tried to force a fight between Bowe and Lewis as number one contender when, like I was stating before, in the rules, once you are a new champion, you don't have to immediately fight the WBC mandatory contender next. They have it in the WBC rules. Okay. So Rock Newman tried to work things out with Lewis and his team and said, hey, we'll give you a deal for you to have a voluntary fight first. And once you get through that fight, then you'll be able to fight Bowe in that next fight. Because Bowe was granted a voluntary defense of the WBC title along with the WBA and IBF titles. But Lewis and his team would not accept that. So later on down the line, they made another offer. They offered Lewis $12 million and said, hey, we don't even care about the whole thing with the WBC. We'll just have the WBA and IBF titles on the line. If you win, you'll become the undisputed champion. If we win or Bowe wins, then we'll just still be the WBA and IBF champion. Y'all can keep the WBC. That ain't nothing. But Lewis and his team didn't accept that. They didn't accept it. So they ended up moving on and moving forward. And that's when you ended up having the fight between Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield in the rematch with, the parachute guy and everything like that. And with Evander Holyfield eventually, being able to get the win by majority decision. So that shot for Lennox Lewis to fight Riddick Bowe in 1993 was basically scrapped. It was basically scrapped because Riddick Bowe and his team did not necessarily want to, have that. Now, here's the other thing, right? Everything with the WBC and Riddick Bowe had been patched up to a certain extent. Now, why is that? Well, because in 1994, there was a deal that was made between Bowe and Lewis, right? And that deal was supposed to go through, right? Now, here's the thing. In this instance, Lennox Lewis was going to get the higher share of the purse. Okay. Lennox Lewis was going to get the higher share of the purse. Now, it says Riddick Bowe was ecstatic and thanking his manager, and then he agreed to fight Lennox Lewis. The pair signed to fight for either next March or April with Lewis's WBC title at stake. This is, from what was it, 94. Okay. Rock Newman, Bowe's manager, said he had outbid Moore to meet Lewis. Okay. Newman claimed that this would be the biggest grossing fight in history, with Lewis earning $18 million to Bowe's $13 million. Okay. Now this was, basically, after the whole thing with the whole thing with Evander Holyfield, like I said, Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe after that rematch. So you had the thing with Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe in the rematch, where Evander Holyfield was able to win by a majority decision. Okay. Then after that, Michael Moore defeated Evander Holyfield in April of 1994. So Michael Moore became the unified heavyweight champion at that particular time. So 1994, you were going to have things set up to where you would have, Michael Moore as the unified champion, Lennox Lewis as the WBC champion, and then they were setting things up after Lewis had defeated Phil Jackson. No, not that Phil Jackson, but Phil Jackson in his third defense of that WBC title. Now, all Lennox Lewis had to do was get through the rest of the year. He had one more fight of that year, and that fight was against Oliver McCall. But Lennox Lewis couldn't defeat Oliver McCall. He ended up getting knocked out. Okay. And he ended up losing the WBC heavyweight title in front of 90,000 in Wembley. No, it wasn't in front of 90,000 fans, but it was at Wembley Arena. So with Lennox Lewis losing that WBC title to Oliver McCall, that kind of shot down any chances of a fight between Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe happening there in 1995. But that deal was basically made. There were multiple offers that were sent to Lennox Lewis's team to show that Riddick Bowe was not ducking Lennox Lewis. You don't send multiple offers out. You don't try to get a deal made. You don't step to him face to face and say, I owe you one, after the whole thing with the Olympics. You don't have somebody, like I said, you don't have somebody that is supposedly scared of a guy that, quote unquote, beat him in the amateurs, when later on down the line, Bowe fought someone that defeated him in the amateurs and ended up knocking him out. And I just showed evidence of the multiple times that Riddick Bowe tried to make a fight with Lennox Lewis. And then I showed the example of when they had a deal in place for Riddick Bowe to fight Lennox Lewis. The only problem was Lennox Lewis had to get by Oliver McCall, and he didn't. That nixed the fight that was going to happen around 1995 between Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe. It's all like I said, all Lennox Lewis had to do was fight Oliver McCall, and he would have had the fight with Riddick Bowe, and he would have had $18 million in the bank. But he just couldn't beat Oliver McCall at that time. So he ended up screwing that opportunity. So that's pretty much what I have. Lennox Lewis making that claim yesterday that Bowe never wanted to fight him was an absolute lie. And I show multiple examples where he lied. If you still want to dispute it, you're welcome to post on here and try to post any evidence to the contrary of what I just said and what I just showed. But if not, just leave it be. We see what the truth is. We laid it all out for you. Boxing Source here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Put down your comments. Have a live podcast tonight talking about Wilder Fury rematch. And it's going to be a good discussion about the Wilder Fury rematch. So be sure to catch it live 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But follow the Boxing Source on YouTube, Facebook, and on Instagram. And on that note, I'm out. Peace.